Hi, my name is Dan, and this video is part of a series of videos I'm doing on getting started basically in Unreal. But it's about editing stuff in levels and creating your own levels. And I'm not walking through creating some specific pretty level. I'm trying to show you the tools that you can use to do so yourself. So in this one, I'm particularly focusing on how you can manipulate objects, move them around and do stuff inside your level, and various different options for doing that. So we have a third-person template, and there's actually just a blank floor and a few objects in this level, which have been put in as part of the previous video that I've done. So I'm going to start with selection, and this is pretty straightforward stuff. I confess. In a lot of pieces of software, there's this concept of having an item that's selected, which is the one that you're currently manipulating. And at this point in time, we've got this wall with a doorway selected, and you can tell it's selected because it's got an orange outline from it, and also it's got one of the widgets, which are manipulation widgets. This is the move widget on it. Okay, so if I move the mouse pointer somewhere else and click on something else, I select something different. So you can select things directly from the viewport in the world, and you can do so over here in the outliner. Let's drag that down and out of the way if I can do so. Trying to find where the line is for dragging. Never mind. There we go. Yeah. So we can see more of the things in the world. So we can click on something else here. We can also do multiple selections. So you can't do like rubber band drag, but you can, whilst you've got one object selected, if you do Shift and then click on something else, you've got both objects selected. And when you do something, so move, everything that's selected moves. Similarly, in the outliner, you can select one thing and do Shift Select and set. So it's like in Windows. Shift will give you the list, so from the top one to the next one, and Control will allow you to do individual ones. So Control and click. Now, this makes me wonder, what does Control do in here? It doesn't work. No, it doesn't work. It does work in the same way. We've got both objects selected there using Control. So Control or Shift when you're using the mouse pointer inside the viewport, and Shift gives you a range, and Control gives you individual ones in there. Exactly what have I got selected? I've got the sky, atmosphere, and the fire, which is crazy. It's got the player start. We can move the fire around. There we go. Right. So I've done multiple selection. I want to talk about the three different widgets now. We've seen this one, which is the move widget. You see, when you zoom in, I feel like it kind of stays the same size regardless. And if you mouse over one of the arrows, it turns yellow. It's easy to see on this one, which is the Y. And if you then click and hold, you can drag the object around, and we're moving it. Or we can move it in Z. Now, you can actually move it in more than one axis at once. So you've got these little right-angled things in between each of the pairs of axes. So at the moment I've got X and Y selected, and I can move it around in X and Y. But if I select the Y and Z one, if I can get it, move it in Y and Z, and of course the same in X and Z. Okay, and if you highlight the ball, theoretically gives you three-dimensional movement, but you've only got two-dimensional screen, so it's somewhat guessing what you want when you do that, as you can imagine. So that's movement. There are two other modes, which are rotation and scaling. Okay, so there are two ways to change mode. The first one is, let's zoom in on this thing up here. So these widgets here, that one is select and translate. That's just select. So we can select objects, but we can't actually manipulate them, move them around in that mode. That's takes us into move, which calls translate. Translate, which is the technical mathematical term for moving stuff around in 3D world, is translating. Okay. Next one, rotation. Okay, and you see the widget changes. Let's select this thing instead. And instead of the arrows, we've now got these kind of 3/4 circles. And again, we've got the colours, so that means rotation around X. And if I click and then drag, you can see I can rotate it. And there are 3 rotations. So there's that one, and that one. Rotate it on its edge. Nice. Okay. I've put it back to there because it makes sense, but let's give it a couple of crazy rotations. And then zoom out. We just have to work out where these buttons are. And then play, and we've got our crazy bit of Salvador Dali type wall sitting on a point. Cool. So that's rotation, and let's go back into our zoom to see our widgets. And the third widget is scale here. So again, we're going to manipulate this. It looks different to the move because it hasn't got arrows, it's got these blocks on them. And if you highlight, you can imagine if you highlight the X, it'll stretch it out in the X direction. And it's doing it from the registration point, which is at the bottom right in this case. Let's stretch that up there, and more softly to stretch the width like that. And similar to the move, we've also got these straight line bars that allow us to select 2 at once and scale in 2 dimensions, or the other 2 options. And then if you select the box, which is where these lines all meet, it scales in all 3. And in scaling, that's often the version that you want, because you want to scale in all 3 dimensions at once sometimes. Right. So I'm going to zoom back out. There we go. And I'm going to actually, before I go any further, I'm going to show you undo. So I've done make a whole lot of changes here, and I'm just going to undo them all. There's basically infinite undo, and people have used other things in Windows will probably know that it's Control-Z usually is the convention for undo, and so I'm going to use Control-Z, and I'm going to take this back to where we started. There we are, something like that. Now, as well as using these widgets up here for choosing the different modes, you can also do them using hotkeys, and the hotkeys are W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. W-E-R, and you'll get used to those. It can get a little confusing because you're also using W for moving once you've got the mouse button pressed down, and so you might accidentally put yourself back into move, but it's not unreasonable that move is kind of your default one to do. Right. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at snapping. Doesn't mean breaking things. It means aligning things to specific regular spots. Now, before I do, I should talk about Unreal units. So Unreal, now let's go back one step. When you're in a 3D environment, you're using numbers, but it's quite arbitrary what those numbers mean. And so you could create a house, and you're creating it in one system. It might be what you think of as a normal size house, but then when you take it into another system, it might be tiny, or it might be absolutely huge. And that's because what the numbers, the scale of the numbers means might differ in different circumstances. Now, Unreal have gone down a really good route here, which is they have actually specified what numbers mean in Unreal, and they are using Unreal units for size, but an Unreal unit for one Unreal unit for size is actually meant to be equivalent to 1 centimetre. So if we move something by 1 unit, we're moving it by 1 centimetre, and a normal character is kind of a metre and some high. So 100 units is equivalent to a metre. This does make all sorts of interesting effects once we get into the physics, in that we're used to seeing numbers that are related to meters, so things like forces in in newtons, but as well, say acceleration, we're used to seeing it in maybe in meters per second, and actually in Unreal it's centimeters per second, so you have to multiply up by 100, and you often need much bigger numbers than you might have thought in Unreal, but it gives you nice granularity. And there is a snap to grid, and you might not have noticed the snap to grid going on. So as I move this, it looks like it might be moving fairly smoothly, but it is in fact snapping, but it's only snapping to 10 centimeters, so 10 units. And that's been defined here. This is our positional snap to grid at 10. So if I change that to 100, which is a meter, then our snap to grid should snap to every 100. You can see it's much jerkier. We can snap to much higher if we wanted to, or we can turn snap off. And if we turn snap off, then it is genuinely smooth movement and can be fractional units as well. So that's snap to positional. We'll turn that back to 10. You can have snap to rotational. So you might have noticed with rotation, let's change it, that actually it does go in increments. And it's going in 10-degree increments. But if we switch that off again, you get a smooth rotation, and you can have what you like. So Unreal works in, because I wasn't quite at 0. Unreal works in degrees rather than radians. Let's put snap to, on there, and snap with scaling as well, so it's 0.25. I'm just going to put that up to 1 and do some scaling. And you'll see it's very snappy there. Okay. Right, what am I meant to be doing next? I'm just going to consult my list. Right, duplication I'm going to do next. So I'm going to go back to, I'm going to leave it zoomed in, but I'm going to go back to the move tool, and I'm going to show you duplication. So I've got this object selected, and if I just do Control D, it will create a duplicate of whatever object is selected. What it actually does is it creates it slightly offset from the original by, I think it's 10 units and 10 units, so it's slightly X'd and slightly wide compared to the original, which can be a little annoying when you've got to then align them back up if you want more than one here. The other way of doing duplication is, if you've got an object selected, is to actually hold down the Alt key. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key now, and then move the object that you've got. And as you start to move, it creates a new copy, which is nice and smart. And you can do that with, let's have a multiple selection. I'm going to press Alt, and then move, and we're duplicating everything that we've got selected, which is quite cute. The other key potentially to know about moving, about using when you're dragging and moving stuff about is, so I've got these 3 things moved, and as I move them, just by pressing the mouse key down on that arrow and move it, obviously it slides around. And here I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to hold the Shift key and move, and what happens is the camera stays fixed on that object. Also got an interesting effect because the Windows zoom thing is reacting to me moving the mouse about in this case. So the camera stays fixed, and this can be really useful if you're moving objects more than a little bit. Let's just That has been slightly confusing, so I shall zoom out and do that again. So holding shift, and then I can move all the way over here to where I want something. Interestingly, I have never tried this, so I'm going to see what happens if you try rotating with the camera held with the shift key. It doesn't do anything. Okay. All right. So a few more things to look at. So I did mention this in the previous video, but if you've got an object, excuse me, and you want to make sure it's absolutely sitting on the object underneath, the way to do it is to raise it up a bit, make sure there's a gap, and then just press the end key on the keyboard and it drops it down to sit on the thing that's underneath it. Now, I believe that this, again, I'm starting to think about things that I'm not necessarily tested. I'm wondering what happens if you do it on an object without collision underneath. So I'm just going to make a test because this couch underneath doesn't have collision. I'm going to press end, and yes, it uses the collision detection to know where to go. So things have to have collision detection for it to work. Right, so we've got multiple objects over here. I'm going to talk about a thing called Z fighting, which is just something that's worth knowing what it is and why it's happening. I've got two objects here, and I'm going to actually move this right-hand wall so that it's overlapping with the left-hand one. And that's fine. We've got a little bit of a kind of flicker going on down there. And in order to make this obvious what this problem is, I'm going to change the texture on this particular one. So I'm going to go into general here, and we've got that's the mesh that's used. And here's materials. I'm not going to spend a long time on materials, in fact, any time at all. But I'm just going to quickly turn this to a nice stone. There we go. It took a second or two to come up. So we've got that one, and we can see a bit of a strange effect on the top there. But when we start, hopefully this is going to work, when we start actually playing, this should become much more obvious. No, it isn't. I was expecting a flicker, like that flicker on the top. What I'm going to do is just make sure the positions are absolutely aligned. So, where are we? It's coming miles off 0, and 50, that's fine, and 0, and we're going to move that one so that it's, so yeah, I'll show you this in more detail in a minute or two. So it's overlapping, and that's 1550. So of course, when you want things to actually not work right, and then they do work right, so why is that slightly offset? Don't know. I think it's because it's slightly rotated. There we go. And then we'll press play. Hopefully it's going to give us that. Still haven't given us, right, so I've completely failed to show you Z fighting. Which is when, and you can see it a little bit on here, where two textures are fighting for control over a surface and showing how something is. That's going to do it. How something has been displayed, because those two surfaces are exactly aligning with each other. They are now, so you can see even in the editor it's Z fighting. In the world they are. So if you get that sort of effect when you've created stuff in the world, which took me a little while to actually create, the reason is because you've got two objects occupying the same surface, and the best way to deal with it is just to not have that happen. If you can't avoid having that happen, then the thing to do is to actually just slightly change the scale of one so that they're slightly out of line, or slightly move one, nudge it to move it across. Now, you saw me there using this transform down here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in a bit on that object there, and I'm going to show that in more detail. Windows. So this is in the the details panel for an object, and it's this thing called the transform, and it's not, sorry, the transform, not the transform. The emphasis is slightly different because it's a noun. And the transform is a mathematical thing which holds, it's actually a matrix if you're interested, it holds the location, rotation and scale of the object. It also holds a thing called shear, but you don't play about with that in Unreal. And so very obviously this is kind of relating to a world origin, which is at 0, 0, 0, and if we want to move something around, so at the moment it's x 120, and we can just type in numbers, so I can make it x 140 and it'll just move. Or I can, if I move the mouse over to where it's got it becomes this double-headed arrow, I can drag around and drag values here. Rotation similarly, flap it down, there we go. Rotate around the x-axis is more interesting, there we go. And scale, so in the 3 dimensions. Now what you can't do in the transform as easily is do 2 at once to the same amount. So often, particularly with scale, you might want to be using the widget and dragging out from there. Right, so that's kind of all the principles and the things that I want to show you. What I'm going to do is just very quickly live create, using these walls, create a quick room just using some of these techniques, hopefully just to show you how easy it can be once you get going. So I'm just going to stick a wall down, and I'm going to do Alt drag to get another wall. So that's 2 walls, and I'm going to do Alt drag to get a 3rd wall. And I'm going to select all 3. I probably should have done this before. So I tend to, instead of using these 4 different modes to align things, like the architectural views, I tend to use the transform instead. Let's go back to here. So I've got this at multiple locations in X, that's fine. I'll just pick one of them and put it somewhere sensible. So I'm going to do, let's call that 600. And then that one's going to be, so the wall's 400, so let's make that, it's nearly at 1,000. 1,000. And then the next wall to be 1,400. So I know it's a 400 wide wall. In fact, it says down here 400 by 400. And then I'm going to select all 3, because then I can set for Y. I'm going to set it, it's roughly 1,800. Sorry, minus 1,800. Why is that not minus 1,800? I'm pressing enter to make it happen. Right, so what I'm going to do is I've got all 3 selected, and I'm going to use that to duplicate and create my next wall, which is going to be over here. We've got the first one was at 1,800, and we've got 3 400 length walls, so that makes them the 1,200. So 1,800, 1,200, that should be 3,000. Actually, minus 3,000, of course. There we go. And to make the other 2 walls, I'm going to hold Alt and do this again, drag it out, and then I'm going to do a rotate for the whole thing. Rotate around 90 degrees, and then I'm going to, again, position these. So, why is it telling me there's multiple there? I don't know. Yeah, I'm not using the transform this time. I'm just dragging. This might have been easier if I'd used a more like a 100 grid. But there we go. I'll probably embed that wall inside. Then I'm going to do another one. Make it. I'm not going to spend time absolutely fine-tuning it. And then I'm going to select one of these and stick a door in and Try and get that so that it lines up. It's close. Yeah, high. It's just slightly out. So I will use this minus 1800. For some reason it's gone slightly up, which is why it's been hard for me to find how to do it. And let's quickly just move the player start. I'm going to use the trick of doing shift to move with it. Now, where did I put those things? That room. There we go. And the player start should be in the room, and we should just have a very quick play to show it. There we go. There's the sunlight. We've got it all. Okay. And yeah, it wasn't big and it wasn't clever, but it didn't take me very long to put several things in and to line them up pretty close and to make something. I don't know if it's useful there, but something anyway. So that's a whole lot of stuff about how to manipulate objects in the world. I've been spending a lot of time moving around with the camera as well. In the next video, I'm going to talk about static meshes, what they are, and some of the more detailed aspects of them in Unreal. So that's it from me for now.